The dressing room smelled of lavender and regret, a tiny space where secrets hung heavier than the velvet curtains. My best friend, Lena, stood inches from me, her breath warm against my cheek, and in that moment, I knew my life was about to unravel. I wasn't ready for what she did next. How could I be, when my heart had spent years pretending it didn't want her? We'd been inseparable since high school, Lena and I, two misfits in a small Ohio town where conformity was king. I was Riley, the quiet artist with paint-stained jeans and dreams too big for our cul-de-sac. Lena was the wildfire, bold, unapologetic, with auburn hair she'd chopped short last summer and eyes that could make you confess your sins. We were 25 now, living in Chicago, chasing futures we hadn't quite figured out. She was a barista with a side hustle in poetry slams. I was a graphic designer scraping by on freelance gigs. Our friendship was the one constant in a world that kept shifting under our feet. That day, we'd ended up in a vintage boutique in Wicker Park, a rare Saturday off. Lena had dragged me there, insisting I try on a dress for her cousin's wedding. "You can't wear overalls to a black tie event, Riley," she teased, tossing me an emerald green gown that felt too elegant for my clumsy hands. I didn't want to be here, surrounded by mirrors that showed too much of myself, my freckled cheeks, my nervous eyes, the way my heart raced when Lena's fingers brushed my arm as she handed me the dress. "Get in there," she said, pointing to the dressing room with a grin that hid something I couldn't name. I slipped inside, the curtains swishing shut behind me. The dress was a nightmare to put on, all zippers and delicate straps, and I was cursing under my breath when Lena poked her head in. "Need help?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Before I could answer, she stepped inside, closing the curtain behind her. The space was too small for both of us, or maybe it was my feelings taking up all the air. Lena's hands moved to the zipper at my back, her fingers grazing my skin, and I froze. My reflection in the mirror showed a stranger, someone whose pulse was a drumbeat, whose breath hitched when Lena leaned closer. "You're shaking," she whispered, her voice a mix of concern and something dangerous. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, just nerves, but the lie wouldn't come. Instead, I turned to face her, our eyes locking in a way that felt like a confession. "Lena, I started, but she cut me off," her hand cupping my cheek. Her touch was fire, and I was kindling. "Riley," she said, her voice trembling, "I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." And then she kissed me. The world stopped. Her lips were soft, urgent, tasting of coffee and courage. My hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and for a moment, nothing else existed. No boutique, no wedding, no years of unspoken longing. But then the curtain rustled, a sales clerk's voice calling out, and reality crashed back. I pulled away, my heart a riot of joy and terror. Lena's eyes were wide, searching mine, but before she could speak, I bolted from the dressing room. The green dress still half-zipped, my world turned upside down. I stumbled onto the street, the Chicago wind biting my skin. Lena followed, calling my name, but I couldn't face her, not yet. I'd spent years burying my feelings for her, convincing myself they were a phase, a mistake, something to hide in a town that whispered sin behind closed doors. But that kiss had ripped the lid off everything I'd tried to suppress. I walked aimlessly, the city blurring around me, my mind replaying her lips, her words, the way my heart had screamed yes even as my feet carried me away. By the time I stopped, I was in a park, the lake shimmering under the late afternoon sun. Lena caught up, breathless, her face a mix of determination and fear. "Riley, talk to me," she pleaded. "You can't just run." But I didn't know how to talk, not when my heart was a tangle of hope and shame. I'd grown up in a house where love like this was a secret you didn't tell, a sin you prayed away. Lena, though, she'd always been fearless, the one who'd come out at 17 and never looked back. How could I explain that I wasn't as brave as her? "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I don't know what I'm doing." Lena stepped closer, her hand reaching for mine, but I flinched. Her face fell, and I hated myself for it. "I need time," I said, the words tasting like ash. She nodded, her eyes glistening, and let me go. As I walked away, the weight of her kiss lingered, a promise and a wound I didn't know how to heal. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The dress lay crumpled on my floor, a reminder of the line we'd crossed. I wanted to call Lena, to tell her I loved her, but fear was a vice around my chest. What did this mean for us? For me, I'd spent so long being her best friend, the safe one, the one who didn't rock the boat. But now the boat was sinking, and I didn't know if I could swim. The next morning, my phone buzzed with Lena's name, and I stared at it like it was a grenade. I didn't answer, couldn't. Her kiss had cracked open something inside me, and I was terrified of what might spill out if I let her in again. I spent the day hiding in my apartment, sketching aimlessly, trying to drown out the memory of her lips. But every stroke of my pencil turned into her sharp jawline, her defiant smile, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. By noon, I'd filled half a sketchbook with her face, each drawing a confession I wasn't ready to voice. I wanted to be angry at her for crossing that line, for making me feel this way, but the truth was uglier. I was angry at myself for wanting it so badly. Lena didn't give up. She texted, called, even showed up at my door that evening, her knuckles rapping softly against the wood. "Riley, I know you're in there," she said, her voice muffled but steady. I stood frozen on the other side, my hand hovering over the knob. I wanted to let her in, to fall into her arms and pretend the world wouldn't judge us, but fear was louder than desire. I stayed silent, and after a long pause, I heard her footsteps fade away. The next day, I forced myself to leave the apartment, if only to escape my own thoughts. I wandered to a coffee shop in Logan Square, one we used to haunt together. The barista recognized me and asked where Lena was. I mumbled something about her being busy, but the question stung. Lena was everywhere, in the graffiti on the walls, in the indie music playing overhead, in the ache in my chest. I ordered a latte and sat by the window, watching couples pass by, their hands intertwined, their love uncomplicated. Why couldn't that be us? My phone buzzed again, a text from Lena. "I'm sorry if I scared you. Can we talk? Please." I typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. What could I say? That I loved her but was too weak to admit it? That I'd spent years pretending my feelings were platonic because I was afraid of what it meant to want her? I left the coffee shop, my latte untouched, and walked until my legs ached. That night, I called my older sister, Emma, who lived in Seattle. She'd always been my anchor, the one who listened without judgment. I told her everything. The dressing room, the kiss, the way I'd run. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Riley, you're allowed to feel this. You're allowed to love her. But you have to be honest with yourself first." Her words were a lifeline, but they didn't erase the fear. I thanked her and hung up, my mind still a storm. The next day, I agreed to meet Lena at a park near her apartment. She was waiting on a bench, her short hair catching the sunlight, a thermos of coffee in her hands. She looked nervous, which was rare for her. "I didn't mean to push you," she said as I sat down, her voice low. "But I've been in love with you for years, Riley. I couldn't keep it in anymore." Her words hit like a tidal wave. Years. She'd felt this for years, just like me, and neither of us had said a word. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, but my throat closed up. Instead, I asked, "What happens if we do this? What happens to us?" Lena's eyes softened, but she didn't have an answer. We sat in silence, the weight of her confession settling between us. As I walked home, I thought about the life I'd built, the safe, small life where I could pretend I was just Riley, Lena's best friend. But that life was a lie, and the truth was clawing its way out. I didn't know if I was ready to face it, but I knew I couldn't keep running. Not from her. Not from myself. The park bench conversation haunted me for days. Lena's confession, "I've been in love with you for years," echoed in my skull, relentless. I'd always thought I was the only one hiding, but she'd been carrying the same secret, and now it was out, raw and exposed. I avoided her for the rest of the week, dodging texts and making excuses about work. But Lena wasn't the kind of person you could ghost forever. On Friday, she showed up at my freelance gig, a small art gallery where I was designing posters for an upcoming exhibit. She didn't say a word, just stood in the doorway, her leather jacket slung over one shoulder, her eyes daring me to run again. I couldn't. Not this time. "Coffee?" she asked, holding up 2 to-go cups. I nodded, and we walked to a nearby diner, the kind with sticky tables and neon signs. Over greasy fries and lukewarm coffee, she laid it all bare. "I know you're scared, Riley. I am too. But I can't keep pretending we're just friends. It's killing me." Her voice cracked, and I saw the vulnerability she rarely showed, the poet behind the wildfire. I wanted to reach across the table, to hold her hand, and say I felt the same, but the words stuck. Instead, I told her about my childhood, about the church sermons that called love like ours a sin, about my parents' silence when I asked questions, about the fear I'd carried like a second skin. Lena listened, her eyes never leaving mine, and when I finished, she said, "You're not that kid anymore. You get to choose who you are now." Her words were a spark, but they didn't erase the fear. I told her I needed more time, and she nodded, though I could see the hurt in her eyes. We left the diner in silence, but as we parted ways, she hugged me, her arms tight around my shoulders. "I'll wait," she whispered. "As long as you need." That night, I dreamed of her. Lena laughing in the sunlight, Lena kissing me in the dressing room, Lena walking away. I woke up with tears on my cheeks, my heart a battleground. I couldn't keep doing this, hiding, running, pretending. But choosing her meant choosing myself, and that was the scariest part of all. The next day, I went to her poetry slam at a dive bar in Pilsen. Lena was on stage, her voice raw and electric, weaving words about love and loss that felt like they were written for me. When she finished, the crowd erupted, but her eyes found mine in the dim light. After the show, I pulled her aside, my heart pounding. "I'm trying," I said. "I want to be brave like you. I just don't know how." Lena smiled, soft and sad. "You're braver than you think, Riley. You're here." She didn't push, didn't ask for more than I could give. But as we stood there, the bar buzzing around us, I felt something shift. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could love her and not lose myself. Lena's poetry slam lingered in my mind like a song I couldn't shake. Her words, her courage, the way she'd looked at me, it was all too much and not enough. I spent the next few days sketching her again, filling pages with her fire, trying to capture the woman who'd turned my world upside down. We started talking more, tentative at first, like we were relearning each other. Coffee dates, long walks by Lake Michigan, late-night texts about nothing and everything. She didn't bring up the kiss, and I didn't either, but it was there, a quiet pulse between us. I was still scared, but being near her felt like coming home. One evening, we ended up at her apartment, a tiny studio cluttered with books and half-finished poems. She was cooking pasta, humming a song I didn't know, and I watched her move with a grace that made my chest ache. "You're staring," she teased, catching my eye. I blushed, but didn't look away. For the first time, I let myself see her, not as my best friend, but as the woman I loved. After dinner, we sat on her couch, a bottle of cheap wine between us. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I knew it was now or never. "Lena," I said, my voice shaking, "I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you for years, and I'm terrified, but I don't want to hide anymore." The words spilled out, raw and real, and I braced myself for the world to end. It didn't. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, radiant. She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "I've been waiting to hear that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then she kissed me again, slow and deliberate, and this time I didn't run. That night, we talked until dawn about our fears, our dreams, the life we could build together. It wasn't all perfect. I still carried the weight of my past, the voices that told me this was wrong. But Lena's hand in mine was a tether, grounding me in a truth I was finally ready to claim. The next morning, we walked to a bakery, sharing a croissant and laughing like nothing had changed. But everything had. I was hers and she was mine, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. Being with Lena was like stepping into sunlight after years in the dark. We were careful at first, navigating this new version of us. Dates at quiet cafes, stolen kisses in empty parks, late nights tangled in her sheets. But the world wasn't as kind as her arms, and I wasn't prepared for the storm that came next. It started with a phone call from my mom. I hadn't told her about Lena, but small towns talk, and someone had seen us together at a festival, holding hands. "Riley, what's this I hear about you and that girl?" she asked, her voice sharp with disapproval. I stammered, caught off guard, and mumbled something about being happy. She didn't yell, but her silence was worse, a cold, heavy thing that followed me for days. Lena noticed the change in me. "What's wrong?" she asked one night, as we lay in her bed, the city humming outside. I told her about the call, about the shame that had crept back in. She held me, her voice fierce. "You don't owe them anything, Riley. This is your life." But it wasn't that simple. My family was my anchor, flawed as they were, and the thought of losing them cut deep. The tension grew when we went to her cousin's wedding, the one I'd been trying on the dress for. Lena was a bridesmaid, radiant in a navy gown, and I was her plus one, wearing the emerald dress from that fateful day. We danced under string lights, her hand warm in mine, but I could feel eyes on us, judgmental glances from strangers, whispers from people who didn't understand. I wanted to be brave, to hold her closer, but fear kept me guarded. Later, in the hotel bathroom, Lena found me crying. "I thought I could do this," I said, my voice breaking. "But what if it's too hard?" She knelt in front of me, her hands on my face. "It's not supposed to be easy," she said. "But it's worth it. We're worth it." Her words steadied me, but the doubt lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. That night, I dreamed of my childhood church, the pews filled with faceless people pointing at me. I woke up gasping, Lena's arms around me, and I knew I had to make a choice, her or the safety of the life I'd always known. The wedding was a turning point, but not the kind I'd hoped for. The whispers, the stares, they followed me home, burrowing into my skin. I started pulling back from Lena, not because I loved her less, but because I didn't know how to carry the weight of the world's judgment. She noticed, of course. Lena always noticed. One evening, as we walked through Millennium Park, she stopped and turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Riley, you're slipping away," she said. "If you're not all in, tell me now. I can't do this halfway." Her words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I was holding back, afraid of losing the life I'd known, afraid of being seen. I didn't have an answer, so we walked in silence, the bean reflecting our distorted shapes. That night, I went home alone, my heart a battlefield. I called Emma again, pouring out my fears. "What if I lose everything?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "What if you gain everything by being true to yourself?" Her words echoed Lena's, and they forced me to look at the life I was clinging to. My parents, my hometown, the version of me that fit their mold. It was all a cage. Lena was freedom, but freedom came with a cost. I spent the night journaling, writing letters I'd never send, trying to untangle the mess inside me. The next day, I went to Lena's poetry slam again. She was electric, her words a love letter to resilience, to love that refused to hide. After the show, I waited for her outside, my heart pounding. When she saw me, her face lit up, but there was caution in her eyes. "I'm all in," I said, my voice steady for the first time. "I love you, and I'm done running." Lena's smile was like dawn breaking. She pulled me into her arms, and we stood there, the city alive around us, our future uncertain but ours. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be fights, tears, moments of doubt, but for the first time, I felt ready to face them. Choosing Lena was like stepping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying. We were together now, really together, and every moment with her felt like a gift. But the world didn't stop turning, and its challenges didn't vanish just because I'd made a choice. My parents called again, this time with an ultimatum. Come home and fix this, or don't come home at all. I chose Lena, but the loss of my family was a wound that bled quietly. Lena held me through the nights when I cried, her arms a safe harbor, but I could see the toll it took on her too. She was strong, but she wasn't invincible. We started building a life together, small steps, like merging our bookshelves, cooking dinner side by side, planning a trip to New York for her next poetry slam. But the outside world kept pushing back. At a bar one night, a drunk guy muttered slurs when he saw us holding hands. Lena stood up to him, her voice sharp, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. I hated that I couldn't protect her from that. Work was another battle. My freelance clients started to dwindle, word had spread, and not everyone was as accepting as I'd hoped. Lena's barista job was steady, but her poetry gigs were unpredictable and money was tight. We fought sometimes, not about love, but about the stress of a world that didn't always want us to win. One night, after a particularly bad day, Lena found me sketching in the dark. "What's this?" she asked, picking up my sketchbook. It was a drawing of us, standing together under a sky full of stars. "This is us," I said. "No matter what." She kissed me, and in that moment I knew we'd make it, not because it was easy, but because we were worth fighting for. A year later, Lena and I stood on a rooftop in New York, the city skyline glittering below us. She'd just won a poetry slam, her words echoing in my heart, and I'd landed a new client who didn't care who I loved. We were still fighting, against judgment, against doubt, against a world that wasn't always kind, but we were fighting together. I thought back to that dressing room, to the kiss that had changed everything. My heart had never recovered, not because it was broken, but because it had grown, bigger, braver, full of a love I'd once been too afraid to claim. Lena was my best friend, my love, my home, and I was hers. We didn't have all the answers. My family was still a distant ache, and the world still had sharp edges. But as we stood there, her hand in mine, I knew we'd face it all, together. Love wasn't a cure for everything, but it was a reason to keep going. And that was enough.